Over to you, Gabrielle.
Thank you very much. As I'm sure all of you are aware, Kenya's 2007 general election was followed by an unprecedented level of violence, which led to the death of over 1,000 people, but the displacement of almost 700,000 people in 2 months. And this experience, together with violence that surrounded elections in the early 90s and in 1997, but also the high stakes that were associated with the recent 2013 election, led many to fear that the election on March the 4th, and more specifically the announcement of the results, would spark widespread violence. However, with some notable exceptions, including clashes that happened before the elections in places like Tana River and Samburu, where local conflicts appear to have been exacerbated by electoral competition, and also attacks on security personnel at the coast the night before the election, the 2013 elections in Kenya were generally peaceful. As I said, this is despite the high stakes associated with the election and intense campaigns that pitted Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto of the Jubilee Alliance against Raila Odinga and Kalonzo Musyoka of CORD, but also problems surrounding the voting and tallying processes and consequent delays and suspicions. People thought that the results would be known within a day. It took almost a week. Also, the fact that Uhuru emerged just having passed the new 50% plus one vote requirement by 8,418 votes, thus securing what was an unpredicted victory in the first round. And then also Raila's subsequent decision to question the credibility of the results and to file a judicial petition. This is interesting because it raises the question of how a high-stakes election and a disputed result in 2013 didn't prompt violence, while a similar context in 2007 sparked a national crisis. Given the limited time that I have, I'm just going to raise a few issues that I think are important and then raise some other issues that are important moving forward. And these thoughts are based on academic research around the 2007 and 2013 Kenyan elections, but also on my work as an election observer in the most recent election. So how can one explain the difference between 2007 and 2013? First of all, many ordinary Kenyans suffered as a result of and were traumatized by the post-election violence of 2007-2008 and didn't want to see history repeat itself. This feeling was accompanied by the development of a pervasive peace narrative, which was promoted by religious leaders and the Jubilee Alliance in particular, and which helped present a peaceful election as a successful election. I think this is very important because it served to delegitimize critical reports or discussions, including in the media, as well as protests and demonstrations in the eyes of many Kenyans as something that would almost inevitably lead to violence. Also important was a very strong and visible security presence in strategic locations, most notably in CORD strongholds, which together with the declaration before the election of any demonstrations over the results as illegal, acted as a clear deterrent to protest. Another deterrent, this time against organised violence and incitement, was the ICC intervention that followed the PUV of 2007-2008, and also new rules and regulations against hate speech and incitement, and close monitoring of political rallies and different media. People clearly thought that people were watching what was being said and that this would be made public and there may be repercussions. The axis of political competition had also changed. On the one hand, you now had the Jubilee Alliance headed by Uhuru and Ruto, who are both facing charges at the ICC. These two individuals were on opposite sides of the political divide in 2007, and their ethnic communities, the Kikuyu and Kalenjin respectively, have a history of inter-ethnic violence. This alliance of the accused, as some people refer to it, presented their troubles at the ICC as political and as something that had been pushed by Raila and his Western allies. In turn, and through a very well-funded and very slick campaign, Uhuru and Ruto cast themselves as, first of all, defenders of Kenya's sovereignty and independence against undue Western interference, as technically savvy generational change, and as the people who could unite Kenyans, and particularly the Kalenjin and Kikuyu communities, and thus ensure peace, as compared to Raila, who was portrayed as somebody prone to violence, or to the use of violence. This campaign had a very strong anti-West and anti-Raila logic, and led to a burgeoning sense of anti-Luoism, Raila's own ethnic community, in certain parts of the country. However, many Luo in cosmopolitan areas, especially in areas with large Kikuyu and Kalenjin populations, responded not by planning or organising violence in the run-up to the election, but by registering to vote back in Luo Nyanza and by travelling back to Luo Nyanza for the period of the election. In contrast, CORD, the alliance led by Raila Odinga and Kalonzo Musyoka, conducted a relatively weak campaign and suffered from internal divisions and corruption, and a pervasive sense that Raila had underperformed as Prime Minister in the coalition government. As a result, Raila and CORD didn't enjoy the same levels of support, even amongst its supporters, as Raila and ODM had in 2007. And many Kenyans I know who voted for Raila and CORD did so as a negative vote against Uhuru and Ruto because they were indicted by the ICC, rather than because of a fervent support and love for Raila. In addition, it seems that the success of CORD and CORD candidates in the new senator and governor races in party strongholds, most notably Western, Nairobi and the coast, helped minimise supporters' dissatisfaction with the presidential race. So to summarise this aspect, the Jubilee Alliance successfully united groups that had previously been in conflict with each other, while CORD didn't enjoy particularly fervent support amongst, I would say, the majority of people who actually voted for them. Greater faith in key institutions, most notably the new Electoral Commission, the IEBC, and judiciary, also meant that people were more willing to accept the results or to contest them through legal channels. And here, Raila's decision to file a legal petition and to explicitly call for calm of his supporters has clearly helped cool tensions, especially in CORD strongholds. Also, while the electoral process was characterised by the failure of new electronic voter identification kits and an electronic voter transmission system, which was supposed to ward against malpractices, and which I can talk about more in the Q&A if people are interested. And while the credibility of the election was undermined by clear errors and a number of questionable results, little hard evidence has yet been presented of systematic abuses that clearly favour one side over the other. Thus, while many people suspect that Jubilee actually gained about 48 or 49% of the vote in the first round, rather than the 50.07% announced, and thus there should have been a runoff, this remains largely speculative, while the size of Jubilee's lead also led many to conclude that even if they didn't really win the election in the first round, they would likely have won it in a runoff anyway. Finally, the length of the political campaigns, together with anxiety around the elections and the cessation of many economic activities, and the very long tallying process, meant that quite simply many Kenyans were tired and just wanted to return to work and resume their normal lives. Many people I know who are firm supporters of Raila and CORD almost can't quite bear the idea of a runoff and of the election going on for even longer than it had already. In short, there's not a single factor that can help explain the difference between 2007 and 2013. Instead, I think you need to look at a combination of shifting ethnic alliances, campaign narratives, stronger and more credible institutions, better oversight by government institutions and also civil society organizations of things like hate speech, different political leadership, strategically placed security, and the attractions of peace. However, I'd argue that the single most important factor, if there is one, is the narrative of peace that developed, which helped to close legitimate space of discussion with a significant amount of self-censorship by the local media, for example, and public action. So just a couple of issues moving forward. First, it was clear prior to the election, that happened a couple of weeks ago, that violence wasn't inevitable. However, it's also clear that many of the underlying issues that led to violence in 2007-2008 are yet to be addressed. And as a result, it would be dangerous for people to become complacent and to assume that 2007 was simply an anomaly and Kenya will now inevitably can't be calm and peaceful. Second, it seems unlikely, at least at the moment, but things can always change, that CORD's electoral petition will be associated it seems unlikely that CORD's electoral petition will be associated with widespread violence, whatever the outcome. For example, if it fails, it will be difficult for Raila to call people out onto the streets, given the kind of support that he enjoys, the likely strategic placement of state security forces once again, and his public announcement and faith in the judicial process. Another issue is the difficulties that the international community is going to face regarding its engagement with the new government and in particular the two ICC indictees. And this is especially true given the stance taken by some donors prior to the election. However, it seems that business as usual will be the most likely outcome as long as Uhuru and Ruto continue to comply with the ICC. There are also concerns about how the new government is going to interact with Kenyan civil society, especially those vocal Nairobi-based organizations that have been actively supportive of the ICC process and incredibly critical of Uhuru and Ruto and their presidential ambitions, and also whether the new government will undermine the level of press freedoms currently enjoyed. One of the most important issues, however, is going to be the interpretation and implementation of the new constitution, which was inaugurated in 2010. And especially important here is the introduction of devolution. And it's likely that significant political battles will be fought between the centre and the new county governments. Neither Uhuru or Ruto are believed to be particularly keen supporters of devolution, but also between different centres of power at the county level. And there were already disputes going on about who gets the nicer office, for example, between the county commissioner and the governor and the deputy governor and so forth. But also between locals and those cast as outsiders in cosmopolitan areas. Finally, question marks surround the likely lifespan of the Jubilee Alliance, and there is the possibility that if it collapses, if Uhuru and Ruto part ways, it will further reinforce ethnic stereotypes and perhaps foster a sense of betrayal among the Kalenjin in particular. However, the alliance, like the coalition government of 2008 to 2013, may prove stronger than some analysts fear. This is given vested interests in its survival, but also the fact that Kenyatta's TNA and Ruto's URP parties need to stay together if they're to enjoy a majority in either house of the National Assembly or the Senate. But I will leave it there, and we can come back to any issues in the Q&A if people are interested.